Hey party people, and welcome to the Westman Islands. I am at the main island for the Westman Islands. I think it's pronounced Jaime. I'm at the harbor. This is the harbor where people evacuated about 50 years ago when this island has a couple of volcanoes on it. The main volcano blew in the middle of the night. The harbor happened to be full of fishing vessels because the prior day had all kinds of storms. So the whole island was able to evacuate off of there. The volcano ran on for like 6 months, spewing out lava, made the island larger, enough to fit about another 200 homes, and big enough to add an airport or redo the airport runways with all of the lava and the additional space. Hopefully it'll be a lot less exciting than that here today. So today I'm going to be taking your SQL Server questions. Let's go take a look at what you highly voted here. Hey, I could just lean back against this and then my butt will get wet, and that'll probably be a terrible disaster. Your highest voted question is from Zach. Zach Jones asks, as I understand it, VARCHAR max is stored as lob data. And I always forget what lob, like if it's exactly large objects, but what he means is, if you remember my How to Think Like the Engine class, most of what SQL Server does is stored on 8K pages, and in that class we use pieces of paper as an example for that. Lob objects are stored because they're too large to fit on 8K pages. They're stored in other 8K pages, not the same ones that house your regular like numeric or short string data. So Zach says, if you alter that VARCHAR max data and you make it a VARCHAR, say 2500, will the lob data eventually migrate back into the primary table? Oh, okay. So I usually want to ask, what's the problem you're trying to solve? Because this is kind of Trivial Pursuit-ish. It's not like you really have to do anything. It's not like this is something that you want to actively go out and try to fix if you make one of these kinds of internals changes. But if you are really obsessed over this for some reason, there are options where SQL Server will store VARCHAR max data either on row or off row. It'll only push stuff off row if it's too large to fit on the 8K data pages anyway. If all the data was 2,500 characters or less, and you're able to work with your developers and just change it to a VARCHAR 2500, I don't think you're going to see big bang for the buck there, because I think most of the data wasn't that large to begin with. So what you can do is run tools like spblitz index, and then the table name, there's a table name parameter, pass in the table of the table that you're curious about. And spblitz index will tell you how much of the data is lob data versus how much of it is just stored on row. If for some reason you think you're obsessed about, I need to move it from lob data back onto the 8K pages, then odds are the data is bigger than 2,500 characters, and you're going to have to work with your developers before you downsize something like that. I would ask what you're trying to achieve, because this is a whole lot of work trying to accomplish this objective. Having said that, if that is important to you, you can change the column over to VARCHAR 2500, and there's an alter index rebuild parameter that moves the off-row data around. Because by default, just a plain old index rebuild doesn't do it, but there's an index rebuild parameter that will. Because this is going to be even more work. Normally an alter index rebuild will just leave the lob data wherever it is in order to make that alter index perform faster, the alter index rebuild perform faster. I have never in my life had to do that in cases where we did make big data type changes, like because somebody didn't know that VARCHAR max had all kinds of other problems around indexing. What was usually better for me at that point was to build a brand new table with the data types that I wanted, and then move the data from the old structure over into the new structure, and then create the indexes online again. Because that's an Enterprise Edition-y kind of thing anyway. Next up, Scott asks, Brent, what tools do you recommend for tracking down locks held by application A that are blocking application B for a long period of time? Do you use SQL Server Profiler, Extended Events, Block Process Report, other? So usually for me, when it's blocking, I don't usually look at the queries, I look at the indexes. So I use spblitz lock if it's something that's driven by deadlocks, SP Blitzlock leverages extended events and goes and checks the past deadlocks on the table and can tell you which tables are involved. From there, I go and look at the indexes and I try to right size them like I talk about in my mastering index tuning class. Or if it's not deadlocks and it's just plain old blocking, there's a little dog over here playing, which is kind of funny. I'm actually going to move over there so you can see it. If it's just plain old blocking, not deadlocking, then what I would do is, the camera's not going all the way over to show the dog. We can't have that. Maybe it's just not, oh here, I'll pick him up and move him. There we go. If it's just plain old blocking and not deadlocking, then SP Blitz Index will surface it. SP Blitz Index will show you which indexes on which tables are suffering from aggressive indexes, meaning that's where all the blocking is happening at. From there, you can then go look at right sizing the indexes on the tables. So just generally speaking, I find indexing a much better fix for that because I can't usually change queries quickly, but I can change indexes really quickly. However, it doesn't feel like I really answered your question. If I absolutely had to track down the queries that were involved in blocking, you could use the blocked process report. I don't think I've ever done it. Michael J. Swart has tools to make the block process report easier to understand. He has this block process report viewer. And so if you search for block process report on BrentOzar.com, we have tutorials on how you turn on the block process report, how you use Michael J. Swart's block process report viewer. We have links over to it. I don't think I've ever done it in my life. I don't think I've even done it once. The thing that I would probably do is, because I'm a huge fan of logging SP Blitz first to a table every 15 minutes, is I would actually start there because it captures all running queries too as well and who's blocking who. It's effectively like logging SP who is active to a table and it'll show me long running blocks. But to be honest, seriously, I just don't do that because for me, index tuning is such a better fix for that problem. Oh, as long as I'm over here, I should also point out the beluga whale sanctuary. So over there, you can see a little white line of buoys over there. On the little white line of buoys back there, there's a beluga whale sanctuary. That's where they keep the beluga whales when they're not in the downtown aquarium. We just happened to go visit those yesterday. They also have a puffin shelter here, which is really cool. They rescue puffins. There's a whole thing around puffins on this island, and I'll talk about that in another office hours. All right, let's see who we got next. Next up, we have Ice Horse Rider. That's weird. Ice Horse Rider. All of a sudden I feel like Dr. Horrible. Ice Horse Rider. Ice Horse Rider says, "You're such a blessing to the SQL Server community." Thank you. He says, "Why are you not awarded a Microsoft MVP? This is beyond me." Ha! I used to be an MVP years ago. Oh man, it's been probably 5-6 years since I've been an MVP. And I gave it up. I gave it up for a lot of weird reasons. So I'm at the point in my career where being an MVP doesn't really offer that much benefits for me. Being an MVP is useful when you want to get exposure or you want to need some kind of stamp of credibility from someone else. And so I understand that there are companies or consultants who benefit a lot from being able to say, "Ladies and gentlemen, I'm an MVP and here's my technical recommendation." But in reality, MVP actually doesn't measure technical excellence. And you can be an MVP without actually knowing what you're doing. Oh, the church bell is ringing. There's a black church. Oh, it only rang once, so I'll skip that. So it wasn't really worth it as a stamp of excellence for me. But I understand that it is a stamp of excellence for other people. So I kind of wanted to just let my spot in the MVP go in order to let other people take my spot and where it would mean more to them. Plus, there are NDAs that you have to sign where Microsoft is effectively stopping you from talking about subjects that are publicly available. And at the same time, it doesn't really benefit you that much Oh, thought I saw a ship coming through there. Doesn't really benefit you that much because you don't get that much advance notice of things that you can actually influence. You get basically told at the last minute, here's a feature that's shipping, tell us what you think, but that ship has already sailed, to use a sailing reference from out here. So it wasn't really worth it to me. I can see why it's worth it to other people, but I was just like, I'd rather step aside from that program and let other people have it. Next up, Kirby asks, I get what MAXDOP does at a server level, but when it's used as a query hint, does it allow several parallel processes to run at once? For example, my server has 32 CPUs. When a query goes parallel, it uses all 32. If I limit queries with MAXDOP 8, will I be able to run 4 queries at the same time? Oh, this is kind of interesting. I don't think you do understand what MAXDOP sets. MAXDOP sets how wide queries can go in terms of parallelism. It says the number of cores that a query can use. However, one query can spin up more threads than that. For example, if you have several tasks that can go parallel at exactly the same time in one query, if you have MAXDOP 8, you can actually stack up multiple sets of 8 tasks that are running at the same time. Now, they're all confined to the same logical processors, the same CPU cores, but you can see a query with MAXDOP 8 build up way more than 8 worker threads. Eric Darling recently had an excellent blog post demoing how a single query could pull 300, 400, 500 worker threads. The other thing that's it's kind of a little misunderstood inside your question is, if a query goes parallel across 8 cores, does it only use 8 cores that are not in use by other queries? And that's not true either. You can have 4 queries that run simultaneously, each with MAXDOP 8, and you can have some of them end up running on the same cores just by luck of the draw. SQL Server doesn't use intelligent CPU scheduling to route cores to the least idle, or route query tasks to the least idle or the most idle CPU cores. I wish that it did, but it doesn't. So I think you are misunderstanding what MAXDOP does. If you want to learn more about that, I have parallelism modules in both my mastering query tuning class and mastering server tuning class, where we dive much more into those mechanics. All right, so next up, let's see what we got here. Next up, we have Mr. SQL Seeks. Mr. SQL Seeks says, I'm currently on SQL Server 2016 and I have compat level 2012. I'm looking to upgrade. Given the issues that 2019 seems to still have, would you recommend upgrading to 2017 or upgrading to 2019 and using compat level 2017? So what I would do, SQL Server 2019 still has compat level 2012. No matter which version you pick, I would stay on the same compat level initially. In the beginning, when you first deploy, stay at the same compat level because there are enough other things that are changing inside your SQL Server that you want to kind of minimize the blast radius of things that people get pissed off about. So staying on that same compat level will help people focus on the things that they're complaining about are specifically related to the engine features inside the version that you're using. Then 2, 3, 4 weeks after you've established a performance baseline of here's what the metrics look like normally, then if you want to play around with the new compat levels, sure, go for it. Leapfrog all the way to the most current compat level. But just don't be surprised if it breaks some of your query behavior and you end up needing to regress back to 2012 compat level. And that's okay. See, next up, Farooq says, hi Brent, I want to create a monitor that will notify me when a SQL Server needs additional CPUs. Besides looking on average CPU consumption for a past period, like a week or a month, what else can be a good indication for a need for more CPUs? For me, the big one is wait time. So the wait type of SOS scheduler yield is the most effective wait type for that. If you see your server bottlenecked on SOS scheduler yield, that's the one that I would focus on. It's still not as simple as just saying that I have lots of SOS scheduler yield weights. The problem is still that your SQL Server licensing is like $2,000 US per CPU core and $7,000 US per core for enterprise. Just because you have high CPU usage or high SOS scheduler yield weights doesn't mean you can just fork out the wallet and start dropping more CPUs inside of there. What you usually want to do is investigate which queries are causing the high SOS scheduler yield weights, and then focus on tuning those, either with index tuning, query tuning, server level settings, etc. But managers usually won't just let you dump a bunch of CPU cores in and call it a day. All right, well, there is a quick office hours here. I'm going to go ahead and call it quits because we got more people coming into the harbor now. So now I'm going to go off and actually get some coffee and pastries here. There are like 4 bakeries here on the island, and I haven't been to any of them, which is a tragedy for me because I'm usually all about fresh croissants. So I will see y'all at the next office hours. Adios.